Welcome to the debate. So imagine you're defending a massive 181-run total.
Right, which is a huge score in any context.
Exactly. You've systematically dismantled the opposition's top order. You have them completely suffocated. They are down to their final 3 wickets, and they need a frankly impossible run rate.
The analytics give you, what, a 99% chance to win at that stage?
Yeah, exactly. 99%. And yet somehow, you still lose on the absolute final ball of the game to an uncapped 21-year-old rookie. Today, we're dissecting an incredible game of cricket, match 15 of the 2026 Indian Premier League between the Kolkata Knight Riders and the Lucknow Super Giants.
It was, honestly, arguably the most breathless finish we've seen this entire tournament. The margins were practically microscopic by the final over.
Which brings us to the core question of our analysis today. And real quick, for anyone listening who might not be a tactical expert, we are going to break down these T20 cricket mechanics, things like death overs or impact players, in very simple, clear language step by step.
Right, no cricket PhD required today.
Exactly. We want everyone to understand the exact dynamics at play. So when we look at a collapse of that magnitude, we have to ask what actually broke. Was KKR's defeat the inevitable result of a systemic, structural breakdown in their team's strategy and late-game execution?
Or, and this is where I stand, was Lucknow's victory simply the result of unplannable, exceptional individual brilliance that just defied all mathematical modeling?
Right. Well, I will be arguing that the Kolkata Knight Riders' loss was deeply symptomatic of structural flaws. Their defensive architecture was compromised right from the toss, and their inability to execute basic bowling plans under pressure exposed a fundamentally broken system.
And I will be taking the exact opposite position. If you actually look at the mechanics of the game, KKR's system worked flawlessly for 90% of the match. It was entirely dictated by the wildcard brilliance of Mukul Choudhary. You just can't mathematically plan for an anomaly of that magnitude.
Let's look at the reality of KKR's situation first, because, the context is impossible to ignore. They are currently sitting in 9th place on the points table, 0 wins.
Yeah, their worst start ever.
Right, the worst start to a season in franchise history. When you are operating in that kind of environment, every structural crack is magnified. And in this specific match, their primary defensive structure was compromised before a single ball was even bowled. They were missing Varun Chakravarti due to a hand injury.
Which is a huge loss, I'll absolutely admit that.
It's massive. Now, they managed to put 181 runs on the board, which is a highly competitive total. But when it came time to defend it, the absence of their primary defensive weapon created a massive void. They had Lucknow down to 7 wickets. They literally only needed to close out the tail to win the game, but they failed to execute basic end-of-game mechanics or death bowling under pressure. That isn't bad luck. That is a systemic failure to adapt to end-of-game conditions.
See, I come at it from a completely different direction. If you evaluate a system, you evaluate how it performs against the variables it is actually designed to control. And KKR's system reduced the Lucknow Super Giants to ruins by the 15th over.
Well, ruins is a strong word.
But it's true. The top order was gone. The middle order was completely broken. A win for KKR seemed not just probable, but entirely assured. The structure did its job. What the structure could not account for was a 21-year-old uncapped player named Mukul Choudhary walking out and hitting 54 runs off just 27 balls.
Right, including those 7 sixes.
Exactly. 7 sixes. When a designated finisher executes their highly specialized role to a degree of absolute perfection, it breaks the opposition's math. No defensive structure, no matter how sound, can adequately prepare for an unknown commodity, pulling off a record-breaking 54-run partnership for the 8th wicket. It was raw, unadulterated talent overwhelming a planned system.
Let's dive right into that structural foundation then, specifically the bowling effort, and what happens when you remove a key piece. Because you mentioned the system did its job, but I fundamentally disagree.
Okay, how so?
Because the system was operating with a massive, gaping hole. Missing Varun Chakravarti isn't just about missing 4 overs of spin. Let's explain this simply. A spinner's job isn't pure speed. It's about taking the pace off the ball, making it grip and turn, which chokes the run flow. Taking him out is like, a house missing a load-bearing wall. It changes the entire geometry of how the captain sets the field.
Sure, it changes the geometry, but
Without Chakravarti to bowl those crucial, suffocating middle overs, KKR had to scramble. They were forced to rely on Cameron Green, who had literally only just been cleared to bowl by his medical board, and Anakul Roy. When you force part-timers and returning players to bowl high-leverage overs against established batters, your entire defensive structure is thrown out of alignment. You aren't dictating the game anymore. You're just trying to survive the innings.
hold on. You're treating Chakravarti's absence like it caused a total collapse of the bowling card. But the actual match data contradicts that entirely.
Does it, though?
Yes. Look at the scorecard. Even without their primary weapon, the KKR bowling system performed admirably to cover the gap. Vaibhav Arera stepped up. Anakul Roy stepped up. They took 2 wickets each. They executed exactly what the analytics demanded, which was breaking Lucknow's engine room. They dismissed Nicholas Puran and Marcus Stoinis. The system actually absorbed the injury shock beautifully. They had Lucknow completely on the ropes. The strategy didn't fail because Chakravarti was missing. It did its job perfectly until the 18th over. It was simply overwhelmed by an extreme statistical outlier at the very end.
But that is exactly my point about structural fragility. A robust system doesn't collapse because of a single outlier. If the system had truly worked, the KKR batting lineup would have put enough runs on the board to make that final 18th over anomaly completely irrelevant.
They scored 181.
They did, but let's look at how those runs were constructed. Let's explain this in easy terms. Think about building a T20 innings like packing a suitcase for a long trip. Ajinkya Rahane scored 41, and Angkrish Raghuvanshi scored 45.
Right, a very solid base.
A solid base, yeah, but they batted so cautiously early on. They packed the suitcase perfectly with all the heavy, basic structural components, but they spent so much time carefully folding those shirts that they ran out of room for the essentials for the final days.
Ugh, come on.
I mean, yes, KKR had a late burst of 66 runs in the final 5 overs, but because the first 15 overs were navigated so cautiously, they left themselves 15 or 20 runs short of a truly safe total. They didn't calculate the risk-reward ratio correctly for modern T20 conditions.
I have to stop you there, because framing 181 as a deficient total completely ignores the reality of the pitch conditions that night. The ball was gripping. It was not a flat 200-plus run highway.
It wasn't a highway, sure, but a score of 181 was objectively a massive, highly intimidating total. You're saying they underpacked the suitcase, but look at the other side of the ledger. Ayush Badoni had to play an incredibly difficult, crucial knock of 54 runs just to keep Lucknow's chase breathing during those middle overs.
Right, when KKR's bowlers were actually suffocating them. Exactly. If KKR's total of 181 was truly fundamentally deficient, Lucknow would have cruised to victory in the 18th over. They wouldn't have needed a miracle on ball 120. The sheer fact that it required a historic, last-ball record-breaking partnership proves that total was exactly enough to test the absolute limits of Lucknow's batting depth.
Well, it only looks sufficient if you assume your bowling attack is capable of ruthlessly closing out a game against the lower order, which, KKR completely failed to do. And this brings us to the most critical juncture of the entire match.
The 54-run partnership.
Yes, between Mukul Choudhary and Ayush Badoni. For anyone new to this, when you have the opposition 7 wickets down, you are bowling to the tail end. These are historically the weakest batters on the team.
Right, usually the bowlers themselves.
Exactly. Ayush Badoni is a pure bowler. His job is not to score runs. A top-tier, well-structured team knows exactly how to handle that scenario. You set aggressive fields, you bowl fast, full Yorkers at the stumps, and you entirely isolate the recognized batter, which in this case was Choudhary.
But you can't just...
You don't let the strike rotate. The fact that KKR allowed a 54-run partnership for the 8th wicket represents a catastrophic breakdown in high-pressure execution. The bowlers missed their lengths. The captain failed to cut off the singles. The system collapsed when the pressure was highest.
But you are analyzing this through a completely outdated lens. Calling Mukul Choudhary a lower-order batter and expecting KKR to just easily roll him over fundamentally misreads who he is and how the auction dynamics have shifted.
He batted at number 8.
He batted at 8, yes, but he isn't a traditional tail ender. I mean, let's explain who this kid is. This is a young domestic player who was specifically identified by scouts and purchased for 2.6 crore rupees for one highly specific, hyper-specialized purpose.
To hit boundaries.
To clear the boundary rows fearlessly in the final 3 overs of a match. Look at his mechanics at the crease. He wasn't just swinging wildly. He was anticipating the wide Yorkers KKR was trying to bowl. He was shuffling across his stumps, utilizing the depth of the crease, and using the bowler's own pace to access the short boundaries. He scored at a strike rate of 200, which means 2 runs per ball. He hit 7 sixes under suffocating pressure. That is elite world-class execution of a hyper-specialized role. It's not a bowling failure.
Which is visually spectacular, I won't deny that. But you are describing it as if it's an unstoppable force of nature, rather than a simple failure of KKR's bowlers to adapt their lengths.
Well, it essentially is an unstoppable force when a player of that talent profile enters that specific psychological zone. Athletes call it a flow state. The game slows down, instinct takes over, and every physical movement is perfectly synchronized with the ball.
Okay, but
when a player like Choudhary taps into that rhythm and perfectly predicts what the bowler is going to do, it renders your structural bowling plans completely irrelevant. KKR could have put 9 fielders on the boundary rope and he still would have cleared them. He wasn't mishitting the ball, he was finding the absolute middle of the bat every single time. That isn't KKR failing, that is the sheer unstoppable magic of a wild card player breaking the mathematical models.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning at all. You are treating this flow state as if it occurred in a vacuum, entirely disconnected from the psychological environment of the match. Flow states don't just happen. They are allowed to happen when the opposition gives you the slightest opening.
I don't think KKR gave him an opening. He took it.
They gave it to him because of the broader environment dictating their execution. We cannot ignore the leadership and confidence dynamics at play here. Let's look off the field for a moment, because frankly, the boardroom absolutely bleeds onto the pitch.
I mean, I'm not sure we need to bring the front office into a debate about death bowling.
It is entirely relevant to how a team handles pressure. Just days before this match, Lucknow's team owner Sanjeev Goenka made a very public, definitive statement backing his captain, Rishabh Pant.
Right, amidst all those removal rumors.
Exactly. There were intense rumors that Pant might be stripped of the captaincy due to early season struggles. By publicly killing those rumors, Goenka gave the team a foundation of absolute stability. The players knew their leadership was secure. There was clarity. Now, contrast that psychological environment with the Kolkata Knight Riders.
Sure, they are panicking.
They are sitting near the absolute bottom of the table. They haven't won a single game. Panic is naturally setting in. When the pressure mounts in those final death overs, when the margins shrink to millimeters and you have to execute a perfect Yorker to win the game, a team with stable leadership trusts their plans and hits their mark.
A team operating in a panic environment second-guesses their field placements, bowls the wrong ball to the wrong player, misses their length by 2 inches, and lets a 21-year-old hit 7 sixes. The execution failure was born from structural panic.
That is incredibly reductive and honestly a classic example of outcome bias. I understand the temptation to connect the boardroom stability to a ball clearing the boundary rope, but let's apply some rigorous intellectual honesty to this narrative.
How is it outcome bias?
Imagine for just a fraction of a second that Mukul Choudhary misjudges the flight of that absolute final ball.
Okay, let's say he does.
Imagine his bat speed is just 1/10 of a second too slow. He edges the ball, it goes straight up in the air, the fielder catches it, and KKR wins the match by 1 run. If that happens, what would we be talking about today?
Well, we would likely be focusing on KKR's resilience under fire.
Exactly. The entire media narrative would flip overnight. We would be absolutely roasting Lucknow for a catastrophic middle-order collapse. We would be talking about how Rishabh Pant's team completely lost their nerve and choked the chase.
That's a fair point, but
We would be praising KKR's brilliant systemic bowling plan, talking about how Vaibhava Arora and Anukul Roy stepped up masterfully to strangle Lucknow. We would be saying KKR's dugout remained remarkably calm despite being 9th on the table. By attributing this specific last-second victory to broad, abstract concepts like stable boardroom leadership, we are actively ignoring the absolute terrifying reality of how chaotic and razor-thin the margins are in T20 cricket.
Right.
It wasn't a press release from Sanjeev Goenka that hit those sixes. It was a heavy piece of willow swung by a kid who recognized the bowler was terrified of the short boundary, camped deep in his crease, and executed pure physical skill.
But that is exactly why structural integrity matters. The margins are so thin that any crack in your foundation, whether it's the absence of Varun Chakravarthi, a cautious batting approach in the first 10 overs, or a panicked captain setting the wrong field in the 19th over, will ultimately be exploited.
I just don't think you can plan for everything.
You can't rely on the opposing batter misjudging the final ball. As we draw our discussion to a close, my position remains firm. Individual brilliance is undeniable, but KKR's failure to defend a highly competitive total of 181 against lower-order batters highlights deep, ignorable structural deficiencies.
When you fail to close out a game from a dominant position of having the opposition 7 wickets down, it points to a system that is currently broken, relying on part-timers, failing to execute death bowling mechanics, and succumbing to the pressure of a winless season. I mean, they are facing a massive uphill battle to fix their foundational architecture.
And I will maintain that while systems and structural architecture are necessary to get you into a winning position, which KKR did for 38 overs of that match, modern T20 cricket is ultimately a format designed to be disrupted by unpredictable, exceptional individual performances.
Yeah.
A system can account for averages, it can account for matchups, and it can dictate field placements. But a system simply cannot account for a hyper-specialized player stepping up and scoring at a 200 strike rate under immense pressure, perfectly predicting lengths and clearing the ropes 7 times. That entirely defies traditional data planning.
Well, I think despite our disagreement on the primary driver of the result, we have reached a very clear point of convergence today.
Oh, absolutely.
Regardless of whether you view this match as a systemic breakdown by KKR or a stroke of chaotic, unplannable magic by LSG, we can both absolutely agree that Mukul Choudhary is a spectacular emerging talent.
Without a doubt, he represents the exact evolution of the game. Hyper-specialized, fearless, and capable of breaking all the traditional rules of a run chase. He is exactly the kind of player that makes this format so endlessly fascinating to analyze.
It really is a beautiful tension, isn't it? The strict mathematical, data-driven team strategies constantly colliding with the chaotic, unscripted brilliance of human performance. For anyone listening, I highly suggest you dive deeper into the pitch maps and the over-by-over data from this match.
Yeah, it's really eye-opening.
Looking closely at how young, unproven players navigate the intense, microscopic margins of these high-pressure games offers profound insights into how modern sports are evolving.
It absolutely does. It forces us to realize that no matter how perfect the blueprint is, you still have to survive the execution on the field.
Perfectly said. The data can tell you what should happen, but the players decide what actually does. Thank you for joining us for the debate.
Thank you so much for watching this video.